A hush fell over Gate 22 at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport as security officers surrounded the poised, elegantly dressed black woman. Passengers paused, phones in hand, gawking at the tense standoff. The woman's eyes burned with quiet fury. She had complied with all instructions, yet still the officials singled her out. Whispers rippled through the crowd. What did she do? Why her? No one realized that she was Naomi King, the airline's most influential and highest value investor. In the coming hours, her dignity would be tested in unspeakable ways. But what none of them knew was that karma, with all its might, would come back tenfold. Naomi King had never been one to linger in the shadows. She prided herself on her visibility, her power, her distinct ability to effect change from a position of authority. At 35 years old, she had risen from humble beginnings in rural Alabama to become one of the most successful venture capitalists in the country. Her specialty was resurrecting failing companies, refining their business models, and setting them on the path toward monumental success. She had grown up listening to her grandmother's stories of prejudice and injustice in the Deep South, and Naomi vowed she would carve out a better life for herself. Even from an early age, she observed how traveling, whether by car, bus, or plane, was an experience segregated by class, race, and wealth. To her, the sky was the ultimate equalizer, a broad and borderless domain that belonged to no one and everyone. She wanted to ensure that those claiming to offer passage through that sky treated every passenger with dignity. So it was only natural that she set her sights on the airline industry. When an internal lead whispered through a friend of a friend offered her the chance to invest in a struggling airline called Apex Infinity Airways, Naomi didn't hesitate. She analyzed the airline's finances, probed into its operational methods, and discovered a treasure trove of potential. The numbers might have looked grim to outsiders, but she saw mismanagement as an opportunity to revitalize the company. In short order, she poured substantial capital into Apex Infinity Airways, enough to become its highest value investor. She did this not to flaunt her influence, but to quietly reshape the airline's practices. Her goal was to transform Apex Infinity from the inside out: fairer customer service, more inclusive hiring policies, equitable compensation, and an ironclad promise never to discriminate based on race, gender, or religion. She believed that top-down changes could alter the corporate culture for good. And so, she spent the past year behind the scenes, working on strategic initiatives to salvage the airline's crumbling reputation. Month by month, Apex Infinity Airways saw improvements, greater profits, improved on-time performance, and employee satisfaction soared. Naomi often traveled incognito to evaluate the airline's real-time operations, experiencing service the same way as any everyday passenger. Her mother always taught her that to see the truth of a situation, you must walk the path yourself. On that fateful day at Hartsfield-Jackson, Naomi stood by Gate 22 for her return flight to Los Angeles. The airline was hosting a pivotal meeting in LA to finalize a partnership with a major European carrier, and Naomi needed to be present. She wasn't traveling for leisure or to celebrate a job well done. She was doing her job just as she always had. But fate had other plans. Dressed in a simple but refined navy blue pantsuit, gold stud earrings, and comfortable flats, Naomi looked every bit the professional. She was checking emails on her phone when she noticed the shift in the crowd's energy. A pair of security officers approached. They were flanked by a gate agent wearing the navy blue uniform of Apex Infinity Airways. Naomi tilted her head, uncertain of what was happening. "Ma'am," the first officer said, face stern, "could you step away from the desk? We need to speak with you." Naomi's brows furrowed. Her first instinct was confusion. She had done nothing to draw attention. She replied calmly, "Is there an issue with my ticket?" "There's reason to believe you could be carrying contraband, or, at the very least, something suspicious," the officer continued. "Contraband," Naomi repeated, her voice cool but firm. She had no illusions about how quickly such encounters could escalate, so she kept her tone measured. The gate agent, a blonde woman whose name tag read Madison, avoided Naomi's gaze. Her fingers fidgeted with the plastic corners of the desk. Naomi recognized fear, or at least extreme discomfort. Something was off. Passengers nearby started to watch, their phones poised to record. A few tried to listen in, but the scene moved quickly. The second officer motioned for Naomi to follow them. She gathered her handbag, not wanting to create a scene. Yet every step felt like a betrayal of her own sense of agency. She was used to commanding boardrooms, not being ordered around. Despite the humiliation creeping up her spine, she complied. They led her into a small corridor off to the side, away from the main thoroughfare. There, beneath fluorescent lights that hummed like a chorus of mechanical bees, Naomi stood facing the two officers. She was determined not to lose her composure, but a ripple of anxiety coursed through her. In her mind, she recalled her grandmother's stories, how small injustices could balloon into life, altering tragedies. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text from her personal assistant read, "Are you boarding soon? We need you in LABY 6 p.m. Naomi inhaled, resisting the urge to text back an immediate explanation. She needed to stay present. "We have a tip that you're carrying prohibited items, ma'am," the first officer said. "A tip from whom?" Naomi demanded, suspicion creeping into her voice. "I only have my handbag and my laptop bag." "You're free to examine them." Without a second thought, Naomi opened her handbag, revealing a wallet, an iPhone, a set of keys, some makeup, and a small bottle of sanitizer. Nothing out of the ordinary. The officer poked through it, rummaging in a cursory manner. Finding nothing, he moved on to her laptop bag. Inside, there was only a MacBook Air and a few charging cables. Nothing else. "Check her person," he said, turning to his colleague. Naomi's eyebrows shot up. "I beg your pardon?" "ma'am, we can either do this the easy way or what?" She cut in, anger now brimming. She was well within her rights to question them. As a frequent traveler, she was no stranger to random checks. But this was an entirely different scenario. TSA was nowhere to be seen. This was airline security and local officers, something that rarely happened unless there was a dire situation. And calling her a threat? On what grounds? "Let's keep calm," the second officer said, slightly less hostile. "We're just following up on a suspicious activity report." "What suspicious activity?" Naomi pressed. He stammered. "We got a call from the gate agent that you became irate and threatened staff." "That's a lie," Naomi stated, her tone dangerously quiet. The gate agent's refusal to meet her eyes suddenly made sense. Naomi realized with a chilling clarity that the agent might have singled her out for reasons that had nothing to do with policy. The question was why? A rush of painful memories from Naomi's past threatened to resurface times when she had been overlooked, dismissed, or singled out as a potential threat for simply existing in spaces she was not supposed to occupy. She forced them down, refusing to let old wounds break her composure. She drew a slow breath. "Officers, if you need to check me further, can we do it at a private screening area with TSA?" "I haven't even passed a TSA checkpoint. I was simply waiting at the gate after transferring flights. My bag was checked when I went through security in Dallas." "This will only take a moment," the first officer snapped. He gestured for her to extend her arms. Naomi stared at him for a beat before complying. The corridor echoed with the beep-beep of the metal detector wand scanning her body. The device found nothing. Still, that wasn't enough. The second officer patted her down thoroughly in ways that made her skin crawl. Naomi had traveled globally. She'd navigated airports in London, Dubai, Tokyo, and Singapore. Airport security checks were routine, but never had she experienced one this invasive, performed by airline security staff rather than official TSA agents. Anger simmered deep in her gut. She glanced up at the camera, mounted in the corridor. If this was official procedure, it was certainly being recorded. She considered letting it play out, trusting that eventually the truth would come to light. But the next words from the first officer made her blood run cold. "We need you to remove your blazer," he ordered. Naomi's voice tightened. "This is completely uncalled for. I've just demonstrated that I have no contraband, no weapons." "You want to board the flight, don't you?" the second officer said, trying to sound conciliatory. "Just follow the instructions." Naomi could feel the tension in her shoulders. She glanced at her watch. Her flight was due to begin boarding soon. She needed to be in Los Angeles for that critical meeting. Fighting back or refusing the search could escalate matters. Still, she decided to comply for the moment, if only to expedite this baseless ordeal. She shrugged off her blazer, revealing the crisp white blouse underneath. The first officer nodded and instructed her to turn around. He patted the fabric around her torso in a manner that made her shudder. "Blouse too," the first officer barked. Naomi froze. "Excuse me?" He pressed on, unyielding. "We got word that you might be concealing items under your clothing. It's standard procedure if you're considered a threat." Threat? Naomi's mind reeled. A threat to whom? She was a businesswoman with a first-class ticket. She had never caused a disturbance. She clenched her fists. "I refuse to remove more clothing in this corridor. I want a female officer, TSA representation, and a private search area. We can escort you to a secure room," the second officer offered, quietly. At least he had the decency to look embarrassed. Anger boiled within Naomi, but she forced herself to remain calm. It was clear the first officer saw her as an object of suspicion, or worse, as someone he could bully. He hadn't asked about her identity or the reason for her travel. In his eyes, she was just a random black woman who needed correcting. Naomi wondered how many times he'd done this before. How many women, how many people of color had been humiliated in this manner? She straightened her posture. "Take me there, then." They led her through a back hallway, passing a row of maintenance closets and offices. Finally, they arrived at a small, windowless room with grey walls, reminiscent of an interrogation cell. A single chair sat in the corner, and a battered metal table stood under an overhead fluorescent lamp. The second officer shifted uncomfortably while the first officer closed the door behind them. "This is standard procedure," the first officer repeated, as if memorized. His voice carried an edge that suggested he relished the authority. "We'll be joined by a female representative from Airline security." As though on cue, a woman in a black uniform with the airline's insignia stepped in. She had olive-toned skin, her hair pulled into a tight bun. She didn't look at Naomi at first, but then their eyes locked. Naomi saw a fleeting hint of sympathy, or perhaps regret. She introduced herself as Officer Hidalgo. "She'll supervise the next part of the screening," the second officer explained, then gestured at the first officer, who stepped out. Naomi guessed he left for two reasons. Perhaps procedure required only a female officer to conduct a strip search, or he couldn't be bothered to stay once the humiliating part was relegated to someone else. Naomi swallowed, feeling her heartbeat hammering. She had to maintain control, or at least the illusion of it. She set her handbag on the table, rested her laptop bag on the floor, and then turned to Officer Hidalgo. "I want to make it very clear," Naomi began, voice controlled. "I am fully willing to comply if this is truly necessary, but I don't see any justification for it. I've passed standard TSA screening. I'm a paying passenger, and I don't have anything in my possession that violates airline policy. The officer outside claimed there was a tip, but from whom, and based on what? Officer Hidalgo sighed softly. "Ma'am, this isn't personal. We received a security alert from the gate staff. We're just following protocol." Naomi's eyes narrowed. Protocol? She steeled herself. "All right, let's get this over with." Moving robotically, she unbuttoned her blouse. Underneath, she wore a modest camisole. Officer Hidalgo asked her to take that off as well, but did so in an almost apologetic whisper. Naomi's cheeks burned, a wave of outrage and vulnerability washing over her. She wanted to scream that this was an abuse of power, that it reeked of racial profiling, but she also knew that losing her temper could make things worse. She complied, her upper body bared except for her bra. She stood under that harsh fluorescent light, arms wrapped around her own waist in a futile attempt at modesty. Officer Hidalgo ran the wand across her skin, checking for hidden objects. The wand beeped once at her bra clasp, and the officer nodded for Naomi to unhook it. Naomi hesitated, her face burning at the indignity. Still, she forced her shaking hands to do it. It was hard not to let tears pool in her eyes from anger and shame. Every cell in her body screamed that this was wrong. Officer Hidalgo's face flickered with discomfort. She swallowed and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, truly." Naomi gritted her teeth. "Not as sorry as you'll be once I speak to your superiors," she exhaled shakily. "Or better yet, once I speak to the board of directors at Apex Infinity Airways." Hidalgo's gaze snapped upward, confusion etched on her features. "You have connections with the board?" Naomi let the rhetorical question hang in the air. She said nothing further. She merely replaced her bra and pulled the camisole back on once Hidalgo nodded that she was finished checking. The rest of the humiliating search followed. She had to unbutton her pants, turn the waistband inside out, remove her socks and shoes, each step like a dagger to her self-respect. When it was done, Officer Hidalgo cleared her throat. "You're free to dress, ma'am." Naomi's hands trembled as she refastened her blouse. "I assume you found nothing." She noticed the officer's eyes dart downward, as if acknowledging the futility of this entire charade. "That's correct," Officer Hidalgo said, subdued. Naomi gathered her belongings, and at that moment the door swung open. The first officer peered in. He saw Naomi redressing and cocked an eyebrow, as if disappointed he'd missed the show. "All clear?" he asked Hidalgo. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice clipped. He nodded. "No apology forthcoming. We'll escort her back to the gate." Naomi couldn't hold back any longer. She snapped, "I don't know what your personal motives are, but there was no basis for this invasive search. Believe me, this will have consequences." To her surprise, the first officer shrugged nonchalantly. "We were just doing our job. If that ruffles feathers, so be it." And with that, they led Naomi out of the makeshift interrogation room, down the corridor, and back to Gate 22, all under the quizzical stares of passengers, airline workers, and a few onlookers who had their phones raised. Word had apparently spread that a suspicious passenger was being inspected. Naomi's skin prickled with humiliation and fury in equal measure. Her phone beeped incessantly, messages piling up from her assistant and from business colleagues awaiting her arrival in Los Angeles. Normally she'd keep calm under pressure, but her nerves were frayed. She struggled to type, "I'm dealing with a security issue. Might miss flight. Will keep you posted." She sent it off, trying to still her shaking fingers. Over the intercom, she heard the final boarding call for her flight. Her anger flared. They'd left her with barely any time to board. The gate agent Madison looked up as Naomi approached, color draining from her face. Naomi stared her down. "You called security on me. Why?" Madison stammered, unable to form coherent words. The passengers in line glanced between them, none sure what to believe. But Naomi couldn't linger. She was about to miss her flight. She thrust her boarding pass at Madison, who scanned it with trembling hands. The beep that should have signaled acceptance resounded into awkward silence. "You're in seat 2A, ma'am," Madison mumbled. "You'll have to hurry." Naomi didn't respond. She marched down the jet bridge, heart pounding and anger coursing. She vowed that once she was on that plane, her own investment, ironically, she would begin setting the wheels in motion for a reckoning. She was done being silent. Once Naomi stepped onto the Airbus A320 of Apex Infinity Airways, she felt a fleeting sense of relief she had made it. She found her seat in first class, 2A, by the window. She stowed her laptop bag beneath the seat in front of her, placed her handbag overhead, and sank into the plush leather seat. Normally, she enjoyed the quiet moments before takeoff. She would skim emails, sip a complimentary drink, and mentally prepare for her business obligations. But today, her muscles were taut with residual fury. The memory of being forced to strip in that dismal corridor still made her skin crawl. She was restless, replaying every second of the ordeal and trying to figure out how it had begun and why. The flight attendant, assigned to first class, approached. Her name tag identified her as Angela. She had warm brown eyes and dark hair pinned neatly in a bun. Her voice was gentle. "Can I get you anything, Miss King?" Naomi noted the flight attendant's calm, professional demeanor. She was about to respond when a thought struck her. Miss King? That was her surname. Typically, the manifest would show her full name, but rarely did flight attendants address her with such familiarity unless they recognized it. Maybe it was standard courtesy. Then again, Angela was smiling with an expression that seemed more than polite interest. Naomi mustered a tired smile. "Some sparkling water, please." "Of course," Angela said, disappearing swiftly. Moments later, she returned with a chilled bottle and a glass. "If there's anything else you need, please let me know." "Thank you," Naomi murmured, sipping the water. The cabin door soon closed, and the pilot announced that they were preparing for takeoff. Naomi leaned back, exhaling, trying to find a semblance of peace. Her phone buzzed with a final text from her assistant before she switched it to airplane mode. "Don't worry, we can delay the meeting if needed." She appreciated the reassurance, but still felt uneasy. She was determined to land in LA on time. She had big plans for this board meeting, an agenda that included reshuffling certain executives and implementing new guidelines to prevent discriminatory treatment toward passengers. Today's incident had only strengthened her resolve. As the plane taxied down the runway, Naomi closed her eyes. She couldn't stop her mind from drifting back to the confrontation with the gate agent. Madison's apprehension had been obvious, but was it guilt or fear of being caught? Naomi wanted to confront that agent again, but she'd run out of time before boarding. "Once I land, I'm going to get to the bottom of this," she vowed. The plane gathered speed and lifted, engines roaring. Clouds enveloped the windows, and the cabin lights dimmed briefly. When they leveled off, Angela unbuckled to begin the in-flight service. She offered dinner menus to the first-class passengers. Naomi accepted one without looking at it. She was too keyed up to think about food. A voice from across the aisle intruded her thoughts. "Excuse me, are you Naomi King?" Naomi blinked and turned. The man addressing her looked to be in his mid-50s, dressed in a well-fitted suit with silver hair at his temples. He extended his hand politely. "I'm David Graham. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance, Lauren White." Lauren White was one of Naomi's business colleagues and a fellow investor in Apex Infinity. Naomi nodded and shook his hand. Curiosity piqued. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Graham." "Yes, Lauren is a good friend," David smiled. "I thought it might be you when I saw the passenger manifest. I'm also flying to LA for the shareholder meeting." His expression turned sympathetic. "I saw what happened at the gate. That was appalling." Naomi's pulse quickened. It was one thing for her to personally bear witness to her humiliation, but to realize how public it had been made her stomach churn. "You saw that?" David nodded gravely. I was seated near the gate. Yes, I'm sorry you had to go through that. He hesitated, seeming unsure whether to continue. If it's any consolation, it seemed like a serious misunderstanding. The agent looked terrified, like she'd made a mistake but couldn't back out. Naomi breathed a slow sigh. So Madison had realized her error, but was it an error or a malicious act of profiling? Naomi wasn't sure. Thank you. I'm hoping that once I'm in LA, we can address the root cause of this. Apex Infinity has to get its house in order. David nodded, his tone amiable. I agree wholeheartedly. I'm just an outside investor, but I've seen your work, Miss King. You have a reputation for turning these companies around. No doubt you'll do the same here. Thank you. That's the plan, Naomi replied, forcing a small smile. At least not everyone on this flight wanted to see her as a threat. Still, the gnawing sense of injustice refused to let go. After that brief exchange, Naomi busied herself with her laptop, going over a draft of the new diversity and inclusion policies she wanted implemented across the airline's US offices. Her intention was to push for mandatory sensitivity training for frontline employees, ticketing agents, flight attendants, security staff, everyone. She wanted to embed an ethos in the corporate culture that recognized the line between safety protocols and harassment. About an hour into the flight, she noticed Angela again. The flight attendant approached with a quiet hesitation. Naomi caught the subtle flick of her gaze. Miss King, I wondered if you'd like something to eat now. Naomi realized she had been so engrossed in her laptop that she'd tuned out the dinner service. She nodded. Sure, just something light. Angela nodded, then lowered her voice. I just wanted to say I'm so sorry about what happened back at the gate. Some of us saw the commotion. Security was out of line. Naomi's lips curved into a sad, grateful smile. Thank you. That means a lot. Angela hesitated, then asked softly, May I ask, are you with the company? Naomi paused. She was aware that flight attendants sometimes gleaned from first-class manifests if someone was an executive or a notable figure. In a manner of speaking, she answered obliquely, Let's just say I have a vested interest in Apex Infinity. Angela nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. I hope you can fix some things. This airline has potential, but we have issues that need resolving. Naomi recognized sincerity in Angela's tone. Perhaps she too had experienced discrimination or had witnessed it. Naomi placed a gentle hand on Angela's arm. That's exactly what I plan to do. Encouraged, Angela ventured. If I can be of any help, please let me know. I believe in what this airline could be. Naomi took a deep breath. Thank you, Angela. I'll keep that in mind. She watched Angela walk away to prepare the food. The conversation bolstered Naomi's resolve. There were employees who cared, who wanted to do better, who yearned for a corporate culture free from bias. Naomi found strength in that thought, yet the flight wasn't destined to be smooth. Half an hour later, as the cabin lights dimmed for the night portion of the journey, Naomi felt her seat jostled from behind. She turned briefly, noticing a mother with a small child. The toddler was restless, fussing. Naomi didn't mind. She understood traveling with small children was never easy. She returned to reviewing her documents. After another jolt, the child started to cry. The mother's hushed attempts to soothe him were overshadowed by exasperated groans from some of the other first-class passengers, who apparently weren't used to children. In the front cabin, Angela reappeared, offering the mother headphones for the in-flight entertainment and a small plush toy for the toddler. The mother whispered thanks, desperation in her eyes. Naomi felt a pang of empathy. She knew from colleagues who traveled with kids how stressful it could be, but not everyone was that understanding. A man with a receding hairline and an expensive watch sitting a row behind Naomi snapped, "Why can't you keep your kid quiet? Some of us paid good money for peace." The mother looked mortified, her cheeks flushing. She apologized quietly. Naomi's anger flared anew. This was a first-class cabin, yes, but everyone was entitled to use it if they had a ticket. She cast a pointed look at the complaining passenger, but decided to mind her own business for now, especially given what she had just gone through. Yet the scene escalated. The toddler began to wail louder, possibly picking up on the tension. The man rose from his seat, elbowing his way into the aisle. He called Angela over and demanded that the mother be moved to economy. Angela tried to placate him, explaining there were no spare seats. He grew louder until his voice turned into a near shout. People in the seats around them craned their necks, anxious. Naomi felt her insides tighten. So much hostility in one flight, it felt like the entire environment was charged with negativity. Finally, Angela, in her capacity to keep the peace, politely asked the man to return to his seat. "Sir, you'll need to remain seated and calm. We can't move passengers if they have paid for these seats, and if there isn't a safety concern. A crying kid is a safety concern," the man hissed through gritted teeth. "It's distracting." Naomi couldn't remain silent. She unbuckled her seatbelt and turned. "Sir, if a crying child is distracting you, maybe you can put on noise-cancelling headphones or watch a movie. But please refrain from harassing this mother. She's doing her best." He glared at Naomi, lips curling. "Who asked you?" Naomi gave him a cool stare. "No one. But that's not stopping you from antagonizing a woman who hasn't done anything wrong." Angela looked between them, clearly worried another confrontation was brewing. But the man scoffed and retreated to his seat with a dismissive wave. He grumbled under his breath, but said nothing more. After a few moments, the mother locked eyes with Naomi, lips parted in a silent thank you. Naomi responded with a nod, returning to her seat. She closed her laptop, no longer in the mood to read policy documents. This entire flight was a testament to how easily tension could escalate one incident, sparking another. From her humiliating strip search at the gate to witnessing this mother being hassled, Naomi felt the frustration knotting inside her chest. She tried to breathe, tried to refocus. She needed her composure intact for LA. This board meeting was crucial. It was more than just a chance to reinforce her investor status. It was her moment to stand up for the very reforms that would prevent incidents like these from ever happening again. But how effective would she be if she arrived exhausted and emotionally drained? Staring out the window, she saw the vast darkness broken by the faint glow of city lights far below. She reminded herself of what her grandmother used to say, "The darkest times show us how much light we carry within." Perhaps the upcoming meeting would be that beacon. But at the moment, it felt like an uphill battle, with the forces of ignorance and prejudice waiting at every turn. The remainder of the flight was relatively uneventful. The toddler calmed down, and Angela brought over a late snack for Naomi to compensate for the missed dinner. She nibbled on it distractedly, offering a reassuring smile to the mother behind her whenever their eyes met. But Naomi's mind whirled, replaying every detail: the gate, the strip search, the lack of apologies, the stony expressions. What triggered them to treat me like a criminal? She suspected racism, but could it be personal? Or was there something deeper within the airline's internal culture that allowed employees to call security on a whim without consequences? As the plane began its descent, Naomi packed away her laptop and prepared for landing at LAX. She felt the plane's nose dip, the cabin lights come up, and the seatbelt sign ding on. She ran a quick check on her phone's flight itinerary and saw a new text from Lauren White: "Touch base as soon as you land. We need to talk about the board meeting location change." Naomi frowned. Location change? She had last heard it was at the Apex Infinity offices in downtown LA. Something was shifting behind the scenes. The plane landed with a smooth bump. Once they reached the gate, Naomi unbuckled and grabbed her belongings. She noticed David Graham and the mother and child all glancing in her direction, likely curious about how she would handle the aftermath of the fiasco. Naomi offered a polite nod and then moved briskly up the aisle. Upon disembarking, she found a quiet corner near a wall of arrival monitors. She dialed Lauren's number. Lauren answered on the second ring. "Naomi, thank goodness. I heard what happened in Atlanta. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Naomi said, though her tone was clipped. "Though I need answers." "Have you heard anything from the Atlanta side?" Lauren sighed. "Not officially, but I did catch wind that a gate agent called in our security threat. It seems so random." Naomi exhaled through her nose. "It wasn't random. The agent looked terrified when I confronted her. She acted like someone forced her to do it. Any clue who?" "I can't say yet," Naomi replied, scanning the bustling arrival area. "But I plan to launch an internal investigation. Meanwhile, you mentioned a location change for the board meeting." "Yes. The meeting is no longer at the downtown offices. They moved it to a private conference center in Santa Monica. It's hush-hush. I only found out because one of the secretaries forwarded me an update." A surge of suspicion bristled through Naomi's mind. "Why change it so last minute?" "I don't know," Lauren said, sounding exasperated, "but I suspect the CEO, Mark Vogel, might be behind it. He's known for last-minute changes that keep certain people on their toes." Naomi recalled Mark Vogel's aloof manner, how he disliked interference from new investors. She had never had an overt confrontation with him, but she knew he was wary of her influence. "Well, fine," Naomi said, determined. "I'll make sure I'm there. Text me the address. We need to talk strategy. I'm not about to let management bury incidents like what happened today." "Agreed," Lauren said firmly. "Let's meet for breakfast tomorrow, 8 a.m. At the Crescent Cafe in Santa Monica, near the conference center. We'll go together." "Done," Naomi affirmed. "See you then." She ended the call and flagged a ride service to take her to her hotel. Tension radiated from her neck to her temples, but she stayed focused on the hours ahead. "I'll shower, rest, then systematically dismantle whatever cover-up is happening. Time to hold them accountable." At her hotel in Beverly Hills, Naomi settled into the quiet sanctuary of her suite. She let the hot shower wash away the grime of the flight, yet nothing could erase the psychological weight of what she had endured. Toweling off, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes looked tired, but her expression was resolute. After ordering room service, she opened her laptop again and delved into corporate records. She rummaged through board meeting transcripts, staff rosters, and any internal memos she could access. Her investor privileges granted her deep insight into the company's structure. If there was a chain of command that allowed a gate agent to unilaterally call security on her, she wanted to find out who was at the helm. Hours passed in a blur of documents and data. Eventually, exhaustion won out. She crawled into bed, phone on silent, determined to get at least a few hours rest before morning. But sleep didn't come easily. She was haunted by visions of glaring fluorescent lights, the cold demand to remove her blouse, the pitying expression of Officer Hidalgo, the unwelcome memory replayed like a film reel. The following morning, Naomi rose with renewed determination. She slipped into a charcoal grey sheath dress, matching blazer, and low heels professional, poised, unassailable. She met Lauren White at the Crescent Cafe. Lauren, a petite brunette with a sharp wit and a knack for reading people, already had a cappuccino waiting for her. After exchanging greetings, they dove right into business. Lauren handed Naomi an envelope. "You'll want to see these internal memos about the security protocols." Apparently, Vogel introduced a new policy allowing gate staff to escalate suspected threats without consulting TSA. The memo's language is vague, but in effect, it gives them broad discretion. Naomi's jaw tightened as she scanned the documents. "I'm not opposed to strong security measures when justified, but this is exactly the type of policy that gets abused." And Guess who ends up targeted most often? People who look suspicious. Lauren nodded. It's a recipe for racial profiling, yes. Vogel rushed it through the board, claiming it would reduce terror threats. A few other board members probably nodded along, not realizing the potential for abuse. They'll realize it soon, Naomi said, flipping the page. Did you see any signature from me on this? I don't remember approving it. You were out of the country when they rushed it, Lauren replied. They had a quorum, so it passed. Naomi's pulse throbbed in her temple. All right, let's go see what else Vogel has up his sleeve. They settled the bill and headed to the conference center, a sleek building with glass walls overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Inside, the hush of businesslike efficiency prevailed. Men and women in tailored suits rushed through corridors, juggling briefcases and phones. Naomi had visited plenty of fancy conference spaces in her career, but something about the last-minute switch felt sneaky. They checked in at a registration desk. A receptionist directed them to a private elevator that whisked them up to the top floor, where a sprawling suite of meeting rooms awaited. Outside the main boardroom, Naomi spotted Mark Vogel himself, tall and impeccably dressed, his silver hair slicked back. He exuded charisma, but his smile had a certain vacancy that always unnerved her. Naomi, Lauren Vogel greeted, extending his hand. "Glad you both could make it." Naomi shook his hand, matching his firm grip. "Mark, let's head in, shall we?" he said, gesturing to the door. "We have much to discuss, including some new developments with our European partnership." Naomi's voice was calm but unyielding, and also a pressing matter about an incident in Atlanta. "I trust we'll discuss that too." A flicker of annoyance crossed his features, but he masked it with a forced smile. "Of course, we'll address any concerns during the open forum." Inside the boardroom, a long table gleamed under recessed lights. The windows offered a panoramic view of the ocean. Other board members, about a dozen people, were already seated. A few offered polite nods when Naomi entered. The agenda started with routine items, budget allocations, route expansions, marketing campaigns. Naomi watched, waiting patiently. Then Vogel got to the final item, security updates and shareholder queries. Naomi seized the moment. "I have a query and a complaint. Yesterday, I was detained by Airline security in Atlanta. I was subjected to an invasive strip search at the gate, apparently triggered by a flimsy threat report. I want a full explanation." The room fell silent. A few board members glanced at each other, uncertain. Lauren placed a hand on Naomi's arm, a quiet gesture of support. Vogel cleared his throat. "Naomi, that's unfortunate, but our top priority is passenger safety. If security deemed it necessary, I'm sure they had their reasons." "Reasons that turned up nothing," Naomi retorted. "We all want safety, Mark. But your new policy gives gate agents carte blanche to escalate minor issues into humiliating searches. I was singled out and humiliated." One of the board members, a middle-aged woman named Patrice, leaned forward. "That's alarming. Why would they single you out?" Naomi met Patrice's gaze, voice steady. "I can only assume prejudice played a role. I'm a black woman, traveling alone, well-dressed, but I guess that looked suspicious. And if that's how they treat the largest investor in this airline, imagine how they treat the average passenger." Whispers and murmurs spread around the table. Vogel tried to regain control. "We shouldn't jump to conclusions. Security is colorblind in principle. We must investigate the specific individuals who handled your case. It might have been an isolated error." Naomi pinned him with a glare. "I've already begun that investigation myself, but from what I'm seeing, it's a systemic issue. Gate agents have no guidelines and no accountability under your policy. This has to change. Another board member, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, chimed in. If our investor was harassed in such a manner, it's a liability. We're courting lawsuits. Vogel lifted his hands in a placating gesture. I hear your concerns, truly. Let's propose an amendment. We can tighten the language of the policy to prevent misuse. Naomi wanted to roll her eyes. And how long will that take? Meanwhile, paying customers are vulnerable to the same treatment. Vogel forced a smile. Let's remain calm and professional. We'll expedite the revision process. She didn't back down. I want the gate agent and the security staff in Atlanta placed on suspension, pending a full review. Vogel's face registered surprise. Let's not jump to punitive measures without an internal inquiry. Naomi leaned forward, her tone frosty. Don't test me on this, Mark. We have substantial investments in this airline, and I won't stand by while your mismanagement drags us into scandal. If you don't act decisively, I'll escalate it to legal channels. Silence weighed on the room. Everyone understood Naomi King was not a paper tiger. She had the clout, the resources, and the moral high ground to make waves. Vogel had no choice but to relent, at least outwardly. Very well, he said, feigning magnanimity. I'll authorize a thorough inquiry, suspend the staff in question, and call for a policy rewrite. Will that satisfy you for now? Naomi allowed a faint smile. It's a start. With that, the meeting proceeded, tension thick in the air. Naomi's phone buzzed with texts from her assistant, who was waiting outside. As soon as the official agenda wrapped up, Naomi and Lauren left, ignoring Vogel's attempts at small talk. In the corridor, Lauren let out a breath. Well, that was intense. Naomi nodded. We scored a small victory, but I don't trust Vogel. He'll try to minimize the changes. Lauren fiddled with her phone. What's your next step? Full transparency, Naomi declared. We need to get the word out that this airline, under Vogel's leadership, has a serious problem. Once the public is aware, the board will have no choice but to take it seriously. Lauren grimaced, glancing around as if someone might be eavesdropping. You could risk blowing up the company's reputation. Naomi's jaw set. If humiliating and strip-searching innocent passengers doesn't blow up the company's reputation, how can exposing it be any worse? I'm not here to cover up wrongdoing. I'm here to fix it. Lauren nodded, conceding the point. I stand by you, Naomi. Just be prepared for pushback. Naomi's gaze drifted to the window, where sunlight glinted on the Pacific. Let them push. I'll push harder. This stops now. Over the next week, Naomi set her plan in motion. She utilized her network in the media to discreetly share details of her experience. She also encouraged employees like Angela, the empathetic flight attendant, and others who had witnessed or experienced discriminatory actions to come forward. The story began to simmer in the press. Apex Infinity Airways under fire for questionable security policies. At first, it was a mere whisper, but soon local news segments in Atlanta picked it up, featuring interviews with passengers who had faced similar humiliations. Naomi kept a close eye on the airline's internal reaction. Vogel initially tried to dismiss the media reports as exaggerations or isolated incidents, but the volume of complaints made it impossible to ignore. The board, now under scrutiny, demanded quicker reforms. Naomi proposed a new set of guidelines, mandatory anti-bias training, a review board to oversee security escalations, and compensation for those who had been wrongly harassed. As public pressure mounted, the gate agent, Madison's name, surfaced. Anonymous sources revealed she had reported Naomi under instruction from her supervisor, who claimed Naomi was behaving aggressively. This turned out to be a blatant lie. Madison, facing potential firing, came clean. She admitted that her supervisor pressured her into flagging Naomi for security, believing that a random search on a high-profile passenger would demonstrate the airline's thoroughness. In other words, they used Naomi as a sacrificial lamb to prove they were tough on potential threats. Racial profiling and optics all wrapped into one heinous act. Once that news broke, social media exploded. Hashtags like #FlyingWhileBlack, #NaomiKingDeservesBetter, and #BoycottApexInfinity trended. The company's stock plummeted in a matter of days, losing nearly 15% of its value. Board members panicked. They cornered Vogel in an emergency meeting, demanding accountability. Naomi, watching from her vantage point, saw karma unfolding in real time. She took no delight in seeing the airline's stock nosedive. After all, she had a massive financial stake. But she believed that the short-term damage was necessary if it led to lasting, meaningful reform. Finally, Vogel released a public statement. He apologized to Naomi King, acknowledged systemic failures within the company's security policies, and pledged to revamp procedures. It was a carefully worded statement, but Naomi knew it was more about saving face than genuine contrition. Still, it was something. Meanwhile, Naomi gave a single televised interview, deliberately measured in tone. She explained that her goal wasn't to destroy Apex Infinity Airways, but to ensure a fair, safe environment for every passenger. Her composure and sincerity resonated with viewers, boosting public support. In an ironic twist, after Vogel's statement went live, the company's largest partner in Europe threatened to pull out of negotiations unless immediate reforms were enacted. That was the final push needed. Within 48 hours, the board convened again. Vogel, seemingly undone by his own arrogance, was voted out as CEO. He was replaced by an interim leader who publicly embraced Naomi's proposed policies. When Naomi heard the news, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Karma had indeed come calling. She might have been the catalyst, but Vogel's downfall had been a result of his own choices, rushing discriminatory policies, overlooking the concerns of colleagues, and turning a blind eye to wrongful conduct. Now, the path was clear for Apex Infinity to rebuild. Under new leadership, Apex Infinity Airways wasted no time in rolling out the reforms Naomi had championed. Gate staff and security officers underwent comprehensive sensitivity training. Passengers who had been wronged received formal apologies and financial compensation. Madison cooperated fully in the investigation, revealing internal memos that implicated her supervisor and other mid-level managers. They too were terminated or reassigned. Naomi personally oversaw the formation of a passenger advocacy committee within the airline, a group tasked with ensuring that travelers' complaints were handled promptly and fairly. Angela, the flight attendant who had shown empathy on Naomi's flight, joined the committee. She brought frontline insight to policy discussions, ensuring that the airline's theoretical improvements translated into practical, day-to-day procedures. Media coverage eventually shifted from scandal to redemption story. Reports highlighted the airline's fast turnaround, praising Naomi King's leadership and resilience. Stock prices began to recover as the public responded positively to genuine change. While there was still much work ahead, the stage was set for Apex Infinity to become a model for ethical and inclusive air travel. Through it all, Naomi maintained her grace under fire. Though she had been humiliated, forced to strip, and treated like a criminal, she refused to let the experience break her. Instead, she transformed her personal pain into a catalyst for corporate accountability. She knew her grandmother would have been proud. This was the type of justice the older generation had fought for, the kind that left a permanent imprint on society. In the end, the airline that once singled her out as a threat now stood as a testament to her unwavering commitment to fairness and integrity. She had turned the tide of injustice, reminding everyone that sometimes karma isn't just about retribution, it's about paving the way for a better future. Thank you for journeying with me through the story of Naomi King, a tale of power, prejudice, and, ultimately, redemption. Naomi's courage proves that standing up for what's right can spark real, lasting change. Her unwavering resolve held everyone accountable, from the gate agent who buckled under pressure to the CEO whose misguided policies unraveled under the glaring light of truth. If this story resonated with you, please support the channel by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to stay tuned for more inspiring, dramatic stories. Your engagement helps amplify messages of justice, empowerment, and societal progress. Let's continue to shine a spotlight on the issues that matter, so we can forge a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Join us in spreading the word together. We can keep karma rolling toward those who need to feel its weight. Thank you again for watching.